Hi, everybody. Welcome to Conversations with Calvin, We the Species. It's funny. First of all, I'm with THEADORA VOSSE, and I'm going to tell you all about her in 2 seconds. My little monologue. It's so funny. 2 days ago, here in New Jersey, it was 78 degrees, and I'm walking around in a t-shirt. And today, 2 days later, this morning, it snowed, and it's cold. And then they're talking about more snow on Saturday. So that's why I'm wearing, actually, this is my Dome audio headphone sweatshirt given to me by Tim Wright. He used to play for the Patriots and Rutgers. So I'm very excited about, and also it's March 9th, the Ides of March. And Theodora and I met online. Where else? That's how I meet. And she has this amazing podcast, Single or Divorced podcast, where she really reaches out to young people, and there's so much to unpack and talk about. We just spent a whole bunch of time over the last week or so chatting, and we chatted before, and what she's doing is amazing stuff. And by the way, I have a little show and tell thing here, Single or Divorced. That's a little thing from the podcast, which I have to be a good journalist, so I listened to it. And I said to Theodore before he went on air, you have such a great style. I'm not just saying it. You had such a great style. I just felt like you were talking to me, period. You're in the room like you're here right now. You're talking to me, and it put me so much at ease, and it was honest and genuine, and just a great flow and a great feeling and emotionality to the podcast. It's just like we're talking now. You haven't talked yet, but anyway, my monologue is done, and I'm really thrilled to introduce you, Theodora. So I guess let's just do a little bio and talk about where you came from. I know you're not I know you're in Texas now, but you weren't a Texan all your life.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Calvin. I am originally from Inglewood, California. Inglewood, always up to no good, right? And I grew up there, and about at 13 years old, my mom passed away. And so my sister and I moved in with our grandmother and, started a different chapter. And this will kind of tie in, and I think everybody will get to understand as we go on. I experienced multiple generations. I was raised by my grandma, raised by my mom. And so I have maybe a different perspective than most people in my age range, right? And so went to school in the San Francisco Bay Area. So if you guys know Silicon Valley, that's where I hail from. That's my original roots. I worked in Silicon Valley for years, and I worked at some of the largest tech companies that you could think of. Never thought I was going to be in tech because I looked at it and I was very intimidated, but I didn't understand that there was multiple different types of just roles and things that people can do within the tech field. And so I got into learning and development. So I managed coaching programs, executive level leadership programs, and just so many more things. And then I got married right out of college. Never thought about getting married in my life. And so you could probably imagine I didn't have the tools to know how to be in a really quality relationship or identify a partner that I should be in a quality relationship with. And I wouldn't change anything about having been married because I think it opened my eyes to what I'm looking for. It also let me know that I want to be married. That's something that I desire, which I didn't really understand before. And I just learned some things about myself in the process. And so that kind of led me on the journey of getting into coaching. So I coach in finance, in relationships, and in life. And it's just been such a joy to work with other people and a joy to hear just everybody's stories. And the more stories you hear, the more you'll learn that you're not alone. And that's the biggest thing that I've been taking away from a lot of the work that I do.
Great. I just I just told you one of my, which is, you can add that to your repertoire. What I said to my mother the night before I got married the first time.
That was huge. That was
Yeah,
huge.
I mean, it was really an interesting. Anyway, so before we jump into single or divorce, because there's a whole bunch of questions I have. There's another podcast that you did, which you are reviving, and it's called The Miseducation of Masculinity, and I'd love to hear about that.
Yeah, so I have the basis of my style, my teaching, the way I coach is understanding is deeper than knowledge. And one of the things that I found when I was, in relationships, in marriage, is that I had the great desire, maybe we didn't always agree, but I had the great desire for you at least to understand, right, where I was coming from. And so I find that in relationships, that's the biggest missing piece, is that we're not taking the time to really necessarily understand the other person's perspective. And I feel like I keep hearing different narratives about men in the world, and you hear men ain't this and men ain't that. And there's a lot of bitterness, there's a lot of emotions around, relationships. And so my goal with Single or Divorce and with Miseducation of Masculinity is to get people to start talking. So Single or Divorce is highly geared towards women. Men can get value from it. That's not the case, but I'm talking to women. And Miseducation of Masculinity is strongly geared towards men. We're talking to men. And I think that women can also learn something about men in the process. So when I started Miseducation of Masculinity, I really started advocating for men in the first season. And being a woman, I ran out of things to actually talk about at a certain point, right? And so to me, that said, okay, Theodora, now you need to bring in the actual men and have them give their perspectives and share their stories. So we're now in a space of Miseducation of Masculinity, where we're having real men come on the podcast and actually tell their stories. And so I ask questions, but my job really is to listen and to help almost translate for the female listener in a way in certain parts of the podcast. And so that was my original pet project. And because of Single or Divorce, I've seen a desire now for the Miseducation of Masculinity. And it's something about the two of them coming out together. So I think that has been really interesting to see.
Great. My head is spinning with the Miseducation of Masculinity and the Single Divorce. I sit on the advisory committee of the Women's Health Institute, Rutgers Robert Johnson Medical School. And the thing with me was always, I don't really know a lot about women's health, but I do know about the Women's Health Institute and things they're doing and the initiatives. I just posted a picture, actually. I'm a guy, I'm masculine. And I just posted a picture of me and a bunch of researchers and interns, students, doctors from the Women's Health Institute. It was kind of funny because there's like 25 women and I'm sitting on a little chair in front of them all. I just posted that this morning. I thought it was, but anyway, it fascinates me, the Miseducation of Masculinity. So now you have a podcast, Single or Divorced. So how about talking about the origins and how this came about? And there's a whole bunch of questions I have. I can preface what you're going to say by saying I don't think never before in world history has what you're talking about been as essential and critical for building and ensuring and creating better relationships, because we have so many things going on in this crazy world of ours, i.e. the pandemic and the whole socialization, the dating, meeting people. And I mean, there's just so much going on. So the fact that Theodora, you're on this, and you're at the beginning stages of a whole new generation of relationships. I just think you're in such a right place at the right time. And jumping the gun a little bit, I listened to your latest podcast, Is Love Enough? We'll talk about it. But you are so on top of stuff. So, but anyway, how, where, why did this come to be?
Yeah, so there's so much in this single or divorced. Definitely for me, when I went through my separation and then ultimately my divorce, I didn't find a lot of things that related to me as a young person. I used to watch a couple of different shows that I really liked, but they were all, middle-aged women with kids and with, just different things that I didn't have through my divorce. A lot of the similar themes were present, right? But people don't talk about how the young divorcee's experience is really dismissed as a failed relationship when really it's a whole marriage, right? And so I think, like, I've heard things. I remember when I was going through my divorce of like, yeah, you're young, you didn't have any kids, so like no big deal. I'm like, no, 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 no. Like, I, even more so sometimes would feel like, wow, what did I get out of this? Whereas some people come out with kids, they have, just different things that they've acquired in the marriage, right? And I didn't feel that way, and I didn't relate with a lot of people that I was seeing in the divorce space on TV and on radio and things like that. It's always an older demographic, which is fine. There's things to be learned, but I really wanted to create something that was dedicated to us and that really just had empathy for the young divorcee, because we really have been dismissed. And then to your point that you said a moment ago about, being in the right place at the right time for relationships, I think that if we could all start admitting that relationships are so critical to our own personal health as well, we'd be better off. And I think that sometimes our generation can really dismiss the need of relationships or cut people off very fast, or, relationships are really a critical part of development. They're a critical part of, having health. They say that you need 14 hugs a day to be healthy and happy. That's a lot, right? And most young adults, right, we're going to work, coming home, and now a lot of us are working from home, not getting that. I used to take for granted the types of workplaces that I was in, and getting those types of interactions and being able to embrace your colleagues, see your friends. And, that's something that I think that we now know from the pandemic that it's a big important factor of our lives. So if we could all stop fronting and realize that our relationships are very important. Friendships, relationships, family, romantic, friends, they're all important. Colleagues, because colleagues are a big part of our lives, whether or not we'd like to admit that. So these relationships should be pleasant, right?
I love that.
Mm-hmm.
14 hugs a day. I love that. It's interesting. I've written a couple novels, and for me, I can't write unless I know that the world is right.
Mm-hmm.
And so if I'm in a relationship, well, I've been married 44 years, but for me, for me to perform and to get my creative juices going, I just want things to be really good.
Yes.
That 14 hugs a day kind of thing. So that's really, I kind of alluded to this. Do you think this pandemic is going to be a major contributor going forward to relationship stability and strength?
It already has been. I feel like the pandemic has actually been a giant social experiment, in my opinion. Just watching the way that we were able to divide communities, right? Dividing the vaccinated, the unvaccinated, dividing the, just the, like, don't come so close to me, having the 6 feet of distance. And when I just told you about relationships being so critical, and that human touch is everything. And it's not just, people think sexual touches. When I say touches, that's a pat on the back, that's a hug, that's a high five, that's a rub on the back, like, hey, you're going to be all right, right? So if we're, separating people based on certain things, and then we're separating people based on ideas, whereas those people, maybe a couple of days before that were the same ones that were embracing each other, right? So I think it's been a very big social experiment. I think that we've also become more inclined to be in our homes and not realize it. I shared with you, one of my good friends and I we went and, spent some girl time together, and just realized that we were both kind of having a hard time because we weren't always out and about. Like, so we started texting each other like, hey, did you leave your house today? Hey, did you get some fresh air? Like, you have a patio, right? Did you go on your patio? Like, what, like, and we had to realize, that we have to leave the comfort of our homes. It's really easy to be in your home. Everything is here, right? And I'm an ambivert. So that means I have some introverted sides and some extroverted sides. And my introverted side have really been amplified through the pandemic. And so I'm more inclined to say, no, I'm not going to hang out this week. I'll see you in 2 weeks. And I'll be honest, I still did that recently. I'll see you in 2 weeks. But sometimes you just need to recharge. But you also need to realize there's ways to get outside and, be with people. And so I think the pandemic has really shown how easy it is to divide people, especially when there's physical distance. And I think that's the big key. The physical distance is what's made it easier to divide people through the psychological tactics that have been present through this pandemic, right?
Listening to you, first of all, I love that thing you said to your friend. Your friend says to you, did you leave the house today? I mean, that's so profound. Yeah. It occurred to me that in the early stages of the pandemic, having been married a year ago, 43 years, our kids are out of the house and stuff, but my wife and I did stuff to enhance our relationship because we were stuck in a house. So we played cards and played games every night. We hadn't done that in 25 years. So in a convoluted way, I'm just thinking about this, talking to you, Theodora, in a convoluted way, it kind of helped the relationship a little bit. I mean, we played gin every night and backgammon, and it was nice for the relationship. We talked. I mean, never talk. So it's a horrible bright spot, and it's not a bright spot.
Well, and see, you had the opposite interaction, right? For most people, most people's relationships, they haven't entered to necessarily with the right intentions or with the right partner. And being trapped at home with someone that's the other thing people have to think about. Were you using your job, your career, your extracurricular activities to avoid spending more time at home? Right. And so some people had the opposite interaction where they realize, oh my God, I can't stand this person. Why are we still together? Right. As being forced to be at home, had to take a hard look at what's going on in your home. Right. So you had the very upbeat version of that where people.
Yeah, it was. And there was a lot of asterisks. We weren't working anymore. We were the big R, I call it the big R, retirement. So it makes things a little bit different. Part of you got a whole bunch of things to you. Part of your one of your main goals, you like to get people to talk to each other.
Yeah.
And you kind of preach that, and that's a great thing that you do to get people to talk to. There was another question I wanted to ask you, and I asked you before we went on air, and you were a little sheepish, not reluctant, but I personally, because I'm of the male gender persuasion, but my question to you was, do you think there's one gender in particular or none that are reluctant to ask for help?
Absolutely. And it's men, and it's to no fault of their own, because, we're socialized as women to talk to each other, to, heal through our pain by getting into communities and having discussion. And we're taught that it's okay to be open with our emotions, and we can cry, and we're, it's all right. Those are all traits that women can take on without a whole lot of judgment, right? But for a man to ask for help, it's perceived as weak, or it's perceived as not having their stuff together. And there's that, double standard that comes into play, and they're not necessarily able to, or feel able to ask for help in a lot of situations. So I think that we're socialized more as women to do all that talking and do all that conversing, right?
Okay. Just want to remind everybody, singulardivorce.org. Important, singulardivorce.org. Actually, I want to spring something on you, but don't be too put off. I always like to ask this question, and the good news is there's only a one-word answer, and you don't have to answer it if you are so moved. But I like it because it's my kind of a question. So here's the question. Just kind of to break up the. Excluding family or friends, somebody living or dead you'd like to spend the day with. You could answer 1, 2, whatever. It's all up to you. You could say no, let's move on. That's fine too.
I've never been asked that question, but I've heard that question before.
Okay.
I think, let's see. Living, probably, I would say Issa Rae. I really like a lot of the work that she's done.
Okay.
She started, with a lot of YouTube series, and I think she would definitely provide a lot of knowledge on that transition from YouTube to HBO, right? And I'm sure there's more to her story in between, but I think she would be really someone interesting to sit down with and someone to learn from. For sure.
Excellent. Perfect. Moving on. You talk about other things, entrepreneurship, finance, coaching. I just want people to know that.
Yeah. So I started in finance in when I was still in the Bay Area. And I learned a lot about just my own personal finances, right? And a lot about just what it looks like when couples are on the same page when it comes to their money and when it comes to having a vision for their relationship. And I know a lot of people would think, how did you learn about that from being, in financial services? But the company that I was brought aboard to, I saw a lot of couples running their businesses together, which is very unique to see, right? And having quality relationships and quality mentorship and really living the lives of their dreams because of the lifestyle that their businesses afforded them, but also the mentorship piece. I knew a couple that actually planned 10 years of their lives together before they even got married, right? Wow. They planned when they were going to engage, when they were going to get married, when they were going to buy that house, and all the goals and milestones they needed to hit in between. I thought that was just something else. And they, sure enough, have been hitting every single one, because you have two people like going towards a common goal. They're going to hit those goals a lot faster, I think, for sure. So that was really cool to see for me. And, but through the pandemic, I really started to, really see a need to talk about relationships. And that wasn't my initial niche, but I was like, you know what, who better than? And sometimes we have to say that to ourselves when we're kind of like skeptical about, starting something new, and why would I be qualified to talk about this subject? But who better than, right? Who better than with the lived experiences? And so I started pulling together panels. I started pulling together different one-on-ones with people. And I just learned so much more about money, more about relationships, and just more about other people's perspectives. I knew a lot about certain things in different areas, but hearing from other people, that's the thing. Like hearing from other people, I've learned so much. Yeah.
It's just so fascinating, listening to you, your grasp and your depth and the breadth of. I just find it fascinating. And now one of the most fascinating questions. You had made this statement, and it kind of blows me away. There's a gap between millennials and Gen Z, which I do a lot of stuff with Gen Zs because I taught at Rutgers. So there's a gap between millennials and Gen Z. Younger people say they don't need help, and then you told me before we went on air, there's a new term that's being used called elder millennial. If you could define that.
I think that's perfect. I saw the comedy special on elder millennial, and I thought it was absolutely hilarious. You guys have to watch it. But what I've learned is that there's a kind of a group of millennials that are closer to, the previous generation than they are to being millennials or being Z. And so I think people like me who definitely have strong roots. Like I said, I was raised by my grandma, raised by my mom. And then my stepdad also, he was kind of in between the ages of my grandma. So I had a lot of different ages of people that I've been around. I've always spent time with people, at least probably all my friends are at least 10 years older than me in some capacity, right? So I teeter the line between being full on millennial and being what I like to now call an elder millennial, now that I've learned that term. And so I think that we have an attachment to traditions, but we also have another foot in the door where we're attached to progress and innovation. And I think Gen Z definitely is challenging, a lot of things, but sometimes I also wonder if that maybe will change due to experience levels. I don't know. Because there's things that, I used to believe and hold near and dear, but as I got older and experienced other things, I was like, yeah, that's what the older generation was talking about. Duly noted, like saving that in my memory bank. So I do think sometimes there is a gap, and I've met some really awesome people from Gen Z that have been requesting help and do, seek. There's one young lady I mentor, and she's 19 years old, and she's just full of life and vigor. But, I just think about some of the folks that are Gen Z that I do know personally. And when it comes to asking for advice, it's very hard sometimes for them. And I don't know, again, if that's age or if that's the new generation or what that is, if that's a like generational thing or if that's just age. So it's just very interesting to watch and see that happening. And my best advice to any other millennials or any other generations trying to, interface with Gen Zs and provide some wisdom, don't provide it directly. Provide it through your platforms. If you have a podcast, talk about some of the stuff that's an issue. If you have, free coaching, maybe like do workshops where you're talking more broadly, right? But if you want to capture and be able to, give advice, you want to do that through your platforms, not directly, until they're in a position where they can have that direct conversation, right?
Interesting.
So like I have a particular person, they know who they are. I'm not going to say who they are, confidentiality, right? But, that is going through something. And I definitely have, I'm uniquely qualified to, share my experience with this person. Yet I know that if I do so, I will significantly push them away, right? And so I've used my podcast so in the next coming season of Single or Divorced, there's some topics that I've thrown in there to really reach that person without direct about it.
Wow. That is so interesting. I interact with a lot of Gen Zs. I interview a lot of Gen Zs. I taught them. My takeaway is how do I explain it? This generation is going to need more help and support than any other generation in the history of the world for everything in part we've discussed, everything going on, even this war in the Ukraine. I mean, it's just so much going through. They're going to need so much help. And I know they do this all the time. They do this all the time. And they'd much rather do this than do that, which I did, on the phone. But it's fascinating. It may even listen to you, Theodora. I might even change my approach in kind of dealing with them. It's fascinating.
And they're very bright. They're absolutely bright. It's like any generation, right? There's a lot of bright young innovation that's there. I think it's very similar to probably when we were growing up, right? Where it's like, okay, you're young and we have all these big ideas and we, think we, know everything, the moon, the sun, the stars, and can't anybody tell us anything about. And then you learn, oh, okay, somebody already did this. Why don't I start talking to them? Because after enough times of bumping your head, you're going to start talking to other people and asking about their experiences. I value learning from other people's mistakes than learning from my own. I'd rather learn from somebody else than them. And then this generation's where you said they're going to need more support. I think we saw it. You brought up the Ukraine, the tragedy that's going on right now. And it's interesting. They've been used to being able to hop on social media. Like if you think about reviews, you can make a review about a restaurant and then something happens, or you can use social media to be a voice for things and see some changes happen or see some things shift. And so for those that were unable to leave during, during this tragedy, they were posting on social media, posting videos, and it was almost probably unbelievable to them that they're posting all these things and nothing's happening. But if you think about a lot of, tragedies in history, there's been plenty of times where different countries can get involved and send aid and send resources, but it's not happening. And I think it's harder for them because it's on such a public platform and it's accessible like this, and nothing's happening, right? The way that they maybe wanted to see it happen. So I think, it's going to take more than just hopping on social media at this point. We're going to have to really start making some moves outside of our virtual reality that we're in now.
Good point. Good point. And I think it's what's going on now. It's going to help to change the world forever. Next, I thought there's so many fascinating elements here. So I have in my notes, debunking therapy. A lot of people say I don't need fixing. So how do we get them to realize they do need fixing?
Yeah, I mean, so listen, check this out. If everybody really just like embraced the fact that none of us got an adult manual when we, got set out into the world, whether you got kicked out of your house at 18 or you were sent off to college, nobody got a manual that said, Calvin, THEADORA, here's how to be an adult, line by line. Here's how to take care of your bit. Like nobody got that, right? So we learned a lot from our mistakes. I'm sure if, you had some great parents, they, maybe taught you some things, but there's still, even with the wisdom that they pass on, there's still so many things that until it happens to you, like it's unknown. Like I saw a video the other day, it really cracked me up, but I realized I had a unique ability to know that that was something. And so when I was in college, I was a resident assistant and we used to do fire health and safety checks. And one of the things that we would do is on the different resident hall floors, we'd go in and check the dryers to make sure the lint traps were clean, because you could, set a fire if there's an excess of lint built up in your lint trap. If you didn't know, check your lint traps. But I saw a video where somebody's explaining that I didn't know I could set a fire and I'm like, oh my God. But again, if it's not something that unless you're positioned, to know it, that you would necessarily know, like to check your lint trap or to like, that's just not something that you would know. And so I always think to people, just give yourself a break in those areas because there's no manual that tells you how to be an adult, right? Like there's none.
Correct.
I wish there was one, but there's not.
Correct.
Yeah.
Our last segment, I actually had the thrill. For me, it was thrilling to listen to your latest podcast, Is Love Enough? And I again tell folks, please check it out, singleatdivorce.org, and go to the podcast. But this was particularly interesting to me, and I love the way you started it off. My ex-husband was very responsible. If anything went wrong, he was usually responsible. I mean, that's just great. Tongue in cheek, but real fast, just there's a whole bunch. And for me, by the way, a major education for me, though I don't quote need it. I mean, 44 years, but then again, I do. By the way, because relationship is a breathing, living thing, and things do come along, and there's top reasons to divorce. So real fast, I'm just going to go some of the things. If you have any comments, and a lot of these things you never really consider, and you don't. I don't think you give it enough. Young people don't give it enough time, and I mean it's an art to have a great relationship.
Yeah,
and it's an art to stay married and make things work. It don't happen a lot. Therefore, it's an art. I'm making this up as I go along. So top reasons, your comments, THEADORA, if you have a lot of conflict and you're arguing all the time, right? That's a reason.
Yeah.
What about lack of commitment? You know, these are all valid. I'm just going down what you talked about. Infidelity, you talk, and by the way, you said something interesting in the podcast. You talk about infidelity even before you define it for yourselves.
Mm-hmm.
And I thought that was brilliant. You sit down with your fiance and you talk about, let's talk about infidelity. This is infidelity to me. This boom, 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 boom. Don't assume that you think you know, and talk about it.
Yeah.
A lack of emotional and physical intimacy, and
that's a big one for people, men and women. I think it's a lot for men, but it's a lot for women too, actually.
Okay. Just basic communication, right, between partners. Domestic violence, boom.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I interviewed she was a sophomore at Rutgers early on in my series. She was studying intimate partner violence. And Jackie Mayer, I interviewed her like a year ago when I began this podcast. And she observed then that the pandemic ain't helping things. People are thrown together and
it's behind closed doors.
Yep. Realization, everybody has different values, to appreciate the different values in a relationship.
Yeah.
Okay. Substance abuse, these are obvious things. Financial debt. And what about and this kind of last thing, I think, what about the people marrying too young? What do you have to say about that?
That's tough, because I've seen people that have great relationships that, like, I know a couple that's been married for 22 years. That's, since they were in their teenage years, right? And I've seen them work really well. But I would say to that, they've really had a commitment to always making things work. They, have taken divorce off the table, right? So they're really working through those things. That's a tough one. I don't say that people are married too young. It's just your experience level might be different depending on your age. I just think that if you have all those other things identified and you can confidently say, like, these are my relationship values, then, you can have a successful marriage, have a successful partnership, and see the fruits of your marriage, flourish. But that's a tough one. If you've come from, a home of trauma and you haven't identified some of those things, and then you jump into a partnership, it could be challenging. We talked about, you mentioned domestic abuse. There's also, financial abuse, there's emotional abuse, and some of those things are not easily identifiable if, again, you haven't had relationship experiences before, and you may not be able to pick up on some of those things. As mature as I have always been, I had a lot of blind spots when I went into being married that I wasn't aware of, or things that behaviorally I couldn't pick up on. And so I wouldn't say that you can't get married young, but without putting in the work, it's going to be challenging, right? And then all the topics that you mentioned, those different categories that I talked about, I really believe that they all come back to a lack of commitment. And I actually did an interview with someone today, and what he said was just incredible. He said, you're in love when your partner's well-being is as important as your own. And I thought that was really good, because love is typically identified as like these flutters of emotions and feelings and yada, 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 right? But not the like deep, important things. And so I think that a lot of the topics that I talked about in that episode all go back to a lack of commitment, right? Are you committed to sharing your financial, problems with your partner and figuring out how to make a plan to tackle those, right? Are you committed to talking openly about what does infidelity mean for you? Like for a woman, it could be emotional infidelity.
Right.
Like you sharing that. Whereas a man, it could be fit. So it just depends on the partner, right? And again, it all goes back to lack of commitment. Are you not committed to sharing and making these things work with your partner? So really, I think there's one main cause, which is lack of commitment, and it goes for every single area. But, you know, obviously we like to break those things out to, you know, give people more context, but I really think it goes back to lack of commitment.
Perfect way to do a wrap. And we've just wrapped. We could do this more, and I'm herewith formally inviting you to come back anytime to talk about more of this, because talking and education and sharing, it's so critical. Meeting has been wonderful, and I just can't thank you enough for all this. You've made me think, you've made me learn, you made me look back on a past life and a future life, and you truly, it's been a delightful experience having met you.
Thank you.
Yes, it really has been. This has been great. So, Theodora, to be continued. Okay. Come back anytime, and I can't thank you enough. You in the words of one of my favorite movies, you know, you made my day.